For years, Japanese mini trucks, different types of vans like the Delicas or the Nissan Skyline have been very popular for auto enthusiasts to get interesting vehicles that are usable in the US that may not be available through dealerships. And back a few years ago, the federal government passed an import exemption law that allows 25-year-old vehicles to come into the country. But what clients are finding is many of these vehicles are now being pulled off the road and titles are being revoked for these vehicles in many states. And the reality is, even if your state currently allows them, it's very likely that your title will be revoked soon. And there's a couple articles that we'll look at. This is one from Jalopnik, one of our favorite auto enthusiast sites, that says states are banning legally imported vehicles and nobody will say why. And we'll get into some of the details. It talks about mini trucks, historical vehicles, even surplus military vehicles. We've had a lot of clients that buy Hummers from surplus auctions that used to be able to be used on the road and no longer can be used on the road. So what happened is the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, basically it's a trade group for the commissioners of the DMVs. It's a government, non-government, non-profit lobbying organization composed of motor vehicle and law enforcement administrators. All 50 states, Canada, Mexico, Virgin Islands, and DC get representation. Okay, what they're trying to do is get standardized practices across all states. So a lot of times people think, well, there's a loophole in this state, or I can do it in Maine, or I can register this in Utah. Maybe you can today, but what's happening is, and we'll look at this article, they're getting standardization of vehicle titling. Standardization, meaning that they want it all the same in all 50 states. So here's an example of some of these mini trucks, these JDM trucks, and there was an exemption from meeting federal motor vehicle safety standards. Well, that exemption technically was only for importing the vehicles. It did not supersede any state saying you can't use it in our state. But there was some misconceptions. And many states, if not most states, allow them to be on the road thinking that, well, this exemption from the safety standards means we have to let them go on the road. Well, a few years ago, this group of DMV administrators got together and realized this exemption may not apply to them. It only lets the car come into the country. We don't have to title it if we don't want to. So what has happened? Well, what's happened is, here's an example from Rhode Island. The state of Rhode Island said that your car is being revoked. You fail to comply with this request, your registration could be suspended. Happened in Maine. Driver services update. This is in Pennsylvania. Short vehicle identification numbers. It has come to PennDOT's attention that there are registration plates being issued to some vehicles that do not conform to federal motor vehicle standards. A number of these vehicles are commonly referred to as mini trucks. And it talks about VIN numbers. And we'll look at those VIN numbers in a minute, of having VIN numbers less than 17 digits. Previously, we have indicated to agents that all paperwork for vehicles that have short VIN numbers will need to be submitted PennDOT for review. This process has not changed, meaning that they have to review it and they're not going to accept it. States mention mini trucks in these letters, even though a number of the vehicles were far larger than these mini trucks. Maine's explanation is that it had changed its laws to classify any vehicle not originally designed to meet FMVSS as an off-road vehicle. Now, there's an interesting wording here. Not originally designed. What that means is you can't retrofit it to meet the standards and then get it on the road. It's an off-road vehicle. Those vehicles are not allowed on its roads. The reality is that every import is essentially an off-road vehicle, including the Nissan Skyline, very popular vehicle, and the Toyota Crown. Now, this is just one state in Maine, but remember, this is standardized. Maine's just getting to it first. Other states are going to follow. Rhode Island, here is a letter. What state is this from? Doesn't really say. It could be Rhode Island. If you look closely at your own state's driving laws, you'll likely find some that are nearly word for word what the AAMVA recommends states to do. Remember, standardized. This trade group is what every DMV uses to pass their laws. So it's going to be word for word in your state. Almost every state. Are there a few states where technically, maybe, sort of, kind of, you can get a license plate for these? Possibly. But it's not going to last for long. They're going to get revoked. Representatives from a number of states met in Orlando for the purpose of developing best practices for handling the influx. It was one of many meetings. Here's the meeting overview. Who attended it? Unconventional Vehicles Working Group. Primary purpose was to discuss the first draft of best practice related to mini trucks. Shortly after, the Insurance Institute published an opinion that the trucks should not be allowed on the roads. It's the insurance group. Whether it's agree with it or not, that's what they came up with. By allowing on-road operation of these trucks, the U.S. are accepting another nation's cast-offs, vehicles that no longer meet the exporting country's safety or emission standards. So this is why the DMVs are doing it. They don't want what they consider to be throwaways. And using these vehicles in North America undermines government efforts to improve vehicle safety and reduce emissions. So they're trying to get these cars off the road, and they're going to get the cars off the road. How to identify a mini truck? This is what this organization sent to all the DMVs. If it's a non-standard VIN, less than 17 digits, the world make identifier is not included, meaning that the first digit of most VIN numbers in the U.S. is the country of origin. It does not display a safety standard label. It doesn't have the vehicle weight. If it's got right-hand steering. If it's a Japan vehicle, if it's got a gas engine, most Japan vehicles have diesel. If it's a manufacturer that does not have a dealer network in the U.S., for example, JDM doesn't have dealers here. No, the more North American equivalent. If manufactured in Japan, likely to be one of these. And it had names. Suzuki, Honda, Subaru, Mitsubishi, different models of these trucks and minivans. In 2021, Maine's Bureau of Motor Vehicles, same as DMV in most states, with the help of other states, Georgia, Colorado, and South Dakota, published Regulation of Off-Road Vehicles Best Practices, which clamps down on imported vehicles. And it's not just Maine. It tells you what off-road vehicles include. Surplus military vehicles. Remember, we talked about that before. We had a client recently that bought a used surplus Hummer at a auction, and it was denied a title. Historical military vehicles, mini trucks, all-terrain vehicles, snowmobiles, dune buggies, makes sense. But it also applies to Skyline, Toyota Crown, that kind of thing. Older documents circulated, deferred to NHTSA. They classified off-road vehicles not designed for on-road use. However, there was an exemption for 25 years old. But this new document from 2021 gets rid of that exemption. So, what's the takeaway from this? This is what the DMV is doing. Off-road vehicles should be prohibited on public roadways regardless of age, unless it was a U.S. manufactured vehicle. This is what the best practices by the DMV is being recommended. Do not issue a title or registration for off-road vehicles that were last titled in another jurisdiction. Meaning that even if you had a title from another state that allowed it, they're telling you don't issue a title in your jurisdiction again. Restrict these vehicles to only crossing in a safe manner, not driving on the road. If a jurisdiction is currently registering these, propose statutory language to prohibit registration and recall all current titles and registration. Tells you the story right there. This is the best practices that is being promulgated to the DMVs. If a jurisdiction is required, make sure that it says off-road vehicle not for use on public roadways on the title. This is the state of affairs. If you have one of these vehicles or want to get one, it would be nice to be able to put it on the road, but remember, this deck is stacked against you. All 50 states DMV want these vehicles off the road. Whether you agree with it or not doesn't really matter. They don't want them on the road, and they're going to do everything they can to keep it off the road, including impounding vehicles. We've had many, many reports of somebody that has a vehicle titled in another state that has a loophole, driving it around in their state. Law enforcement sees it, pulls you over, impounds the vehicles. And in some states, they're allowed to confiscate the vehicle and not have to give it back to you. If you think this can't be legal, you're not alone. There's challenges to it, but it's going to be up to you to win the challenge. Here's another page from their book. Document also targets golf courses and off-road vehicles. There's more to the article. We'll post a link to it, but this is a very important article from sources that influence the DMV. So be careful and be aware that if you have or want to get one of these mini trucks, it may be a struggle, it may be a battle. Is it worth winning the battle? You might want to go to court, you might want to fight it, you might want to look at the statutes. The question is it worth going through all that to have one of these vehicles available for your use on the road? If you want to use it for a farm truck off-road, probably going to be okay in most jurisdictions. But remember, no matter what the law says, no matter what the rules say, the bottom line is that the DMV commissioners in all 50 states do not want you to have this car on the road. And they're going to fight every tooth and nail to keep you from having this car on the road. So just be aware of that, what you're up against when you try to put one of these cars on the road. You may be putting it in a corporation name in another state and flipping around different titles in different states. A lot of things you can try, but if the government agency that has power over titles don't want you to win, then at best you're going to have an uphill battle fighting just to keep one of these cars on the road.